Few treatment centers such as this. Question: why were there any at all? A place like this cost a fortune to staff and maintain. In an age where living space and arable acreage was at such a premium, why waste this vast and fertile expanse? And in a society more and more openly committed to the policy of promoting the greatest good for the greatest number, why bother about the fate of an admittedly insignificant group of mentally disturbed patients? Not that Harry resented his situation. In fact, it was almost too good to be true. Question: was it too good to be true? Why, come to realize it, he'd seen less than a dozen other patients during his entire stay here. All of them were male, and all of them, apparently, were recovering from a condition somewhat similar to his own. At least, he'd recognized the same reticence and diffidence when it came to exchanging more than a perfunctory greeting in an encounter in an outer corridor. At the time, he'd accepted their unwillingness to communicate, welcomed and understood it because of his condition, and that in itself wasn't what he questioned now. But why were there so few patients besides himself? Why were they all males? And why weren't they roaming the countryside now the way he was? So many staff members and so few patients, so much room and luxury and freedom and so little use of it, so little apparent purpose to it all. Question: was there a hidden purpose? Harry stared down into the ripples and reflections, and the sun was suddenly intolerably hot, its glare on the water suddenly blinding and bewildering. He saw his face mirrored on the water's surface, and it was not the familiar countenance he knew. The features were bloated, distorted, shimmering, and wavering. Maybe it was starting all over again. Maybe he was getting another one of those headaches. Maybe he was going to lose control again. Yes, and maybe he was just imagining things. Sitting here in all this heat wasn't a good idea. Why not take a swim? That seemed reasonable enough. In fact, it seemed like a delightful distraction. Harry rose and stripped. He entered the water awkwardly. One didn't dive, not after 20 years of abstinence from the outdoor life. But he found that he could swim, after a fashion. The water was cooling, soothing. A few minutes of immersion, and Harry found himself forgetting his speculations. The uneasy feeling had vanished. Now, when he stared down into the water, he saw his own face reflected, looking just the way it should. And when he stared up, he saw her, standing there on the bank. She was tall, slim, and blonde. Very tall, very slim, and very blonde. She was also very desirable. Up until a moment ago, Harry had considered swimming a delightful distraction, but now... "How's the water?" she called. "Fine." She nodded, smiling down at him. "Aren't you coming in?" he asked. "No." "Then what are you doing here?" "I was looking for you, Harry." "You know my name?" She nodded again. "Dr. Manshoff told me." "You mean he sent you here to find me?" "That's right." "But I don't understand. If you're not going swimming, then why... I mean..." Her smile broadened. "It's just part of the therapy, Harry." "Part of the therapy?" "That's right, part," she giggled. "Don't you think you'd like to come out of the water now and see what the rest of it might be?" Harry thought so. With mounting enthusiasm, he eagerly embraced his treatment and entered into a state of active cooperation. It was some time before he ventured to comment on the situation. "Manshoff is a damned good diagnostician," he murmured. Then he sat up. "Are you a patient here?" She shook her head. "Don't ask questions, Harry. Can't you be satisfied with things as they are?" "You're just what the doctor ordered, all right." He gazed down at her. "But don't you even have a name?" "You can call me Sue." "Thank you." He bent to kiss her, but she avoided him and rose to her feet. "Got to go now." "So soon?" She nodded and moved towards the bushes above the bank. "But when will I see you again?" "Coming swimming tomorrow?" "Yes." "Maybe I can get away for more occupational therapy then." She stooped behind the bushes, and Harry saw a flash of white. "You are a nurse, aren't you?" he muttered. "On the staff, I suppose. I should have known." "All right, so I am. What's that got to do with it?" "And I suppose you were telling the truth when you said Manshoff sent you here. This is just part of my therapy, isn't it?" She nodded briefly as she slipped into her uniform. "Does that bother you, Harry?" He bit his lip. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Yes, damn it. It does. I mean, I got the idea, at least I was hoping, that this wasn't just a matter of carrying out an assignment on your part." She looked up at him gravely. "Who said anything about an assignment, darling?" she murmured. "I volunteered." And then she was gone. Then she was gone, and then she came back that night in Harry's dreams, and then she was at the river the next day, and it was better than the dreams, better than the day before. Sue told him she had been watching him for weeks now. She had gone to Manshoff and suggested it, and she was very glad, and they had to meet here, out in the open, so as not to complicate the situation or disturb any of the other patients. So Harry naturally asked her about the other patients and the whole general setup, and she said Dr. Manshoff would answer all those questions in due time. But right now, with only an hour or so to spare, was he going to spend it all asking for information? Matters were accordingly adjusted to their mutual satisfaction, and it was on that basis that they continued their almost daily meetings for some time. The next few months were perhaps the happiest Harry had ever known. The whole interval took on a dreamlike quality, idealized, romanticized, and yet basically sensual. There is probably such a dream buried deep within the psyche of every man, Harry reflected, but to few is it ever given to realize its reality. His early questioning attitude gave way to a mood of mere acceptance and enjoyment. This was the primitive drama, the very essence of the male-female relationship. Adam and Eve in the garden. Why waste time seeking the tree of knowledge? And it wasn't until summer passed that Harry even thought about the serpent. One afternoon, as he sat waiting for Sue on the river bank, he heard a sudden movement in the brush behind him. "Darling?" he called eagerly. "Please, you don't know me that well." The deep masculine voice carried overtones of amusement. Flushing, Harry turned to confront the intruder. He was a short, stocky, middle-aged man whose bristling gray crew cut almost matched the neutral shades of his gray orderly's uniform. "Expecting someone else, were you?" the man muttered. "Well, I'll get out of your way." "That's not necessary. I was really just daydreaming, I guess. I don't know what made me think." Harry felt his flush deepen, and he lowered his eyes and his voice as he tried to improvise some excuse. "You're a lousy liar," the man said, stepping forward and seating himself on the bank next to Harry. "But it doesn't really matter. I don't think your girlfriend is going to show up today anyway." "What do you mean? What do you know about—" "I mean just what I said," the man told him. "And I know everything I need to know about you and about her and about the situation in general. That's why I'm here, Collins." He paused, watching the play of emotions in Harry's eyes. "I know what you're thinking right now," the gray-haired man continued. "At first you wondered how I knew your name. Then you realized that if I was on the staff in the wards, I'd naturally be able to identify the patients. Now it occurs to you that you've never seen me in the wards. So you're speculating as to whether or not I'm working out of the administration offices with that psychiatric no-good Manshoff. But if I were, I wouldn't be calling him names, would I? Which means you're really getting confused, aren't you, Collins? Good." The man chuckled, but there was neither mockery, malice, nor genuine mirth in the sound, and his eyes were sober, intent. "Who are you?" Harry asked. "What are you doing here?" "The name is Ritchie, Arnold Ritchie. At least, that's the name they know me by around here, and you can call me that. As to what I'm doing, it's a long story. Let's just say that right now I'm here to give you a little advanced therapy. Then Manshoff did send you." The chuckle came again, and Ritchie shook his head. "He did not. And if he even suspected I was here, there'd be hell to pay." "Then what do you want with me?" "It isn't a question of what I want. It's a question of what you need. Which is, like I said, advanced therapy. The sort that dear old kindly permissive Father Image Manshoff doesn't intend you to get." Harry stood up. "What's this all about?" Ritchie rose with him, smiling for the first time. "I'm glad you asked that question, Collins. It's about time you did, you know. Everything has been so carefully planned to keep you from asking it. But you were beginning to wonder. Just a bit, anyway, weren't you?" "I don't see what you're driving at." "You don't see what anyone is driving at, Collins. You've been blinded by a spectacular display of kindness, misdirected by self-indulgence. I told you I knew everything I needed to know about you, and I do. Now I'm going to ask you to remember these things for yourself, the things you've avoided considering all this while. I'm going to ask you to remember that you're 28 years old, and that for almost 7 years you were an agency man, and a good one. You worked hard, you did a conscientious job, you stayed in line, obeyed the rules, never rebelled. Am I correct in my summary of the situation?" "Yes, I guess so." "So what was your reward for all this unceasing effort and eternal conformity? A one-room apartment and a 1-week vacation once a year. Count your blessings, Collins. Am I right?" "Right." "Then what happened? Finally you flipped out, didn't you? You tried to take a header out of the window. You chucked your job.